I was standing behind the counter of my diner for the last time on December 15th, 2022, watching the coffee steam rise into a room that had held most of my life. At 68, you learn there are different kinds of silence. There is the clean silence of early morning before the first customer walks in. There is the tired silence after the lunch rush when the plates are stacked, the grill cools, and the day seems to hang for a while, undecided. Then there is the kind of silence that waits in a dying place. That was the silence inside Holloway's diner that morning. It felt like a witness. The bank was coming the next day for the keys. 43 years. That was how long Joanne and I had run the place. 43 years of eggs and coffee, pie and hash browns, funerals and birthdays, first dates and breakups, truckers passing through, farmers coming in before sunrise, kids crowding the back booths after football games, church people after Sunday service, men who had no one left and still wanted somewhere to be recognized when they walked through a door. 43 years, and in the end it came down to one foreclosure notice, one number too large for me to fight, and one winter morning in a town the country had mostly forgotten. Valentine, Nebraska sits on Highway 20 like it is bracing against the wind. Population had been thinning out for years. The meatpacking plant closed. Young people left. Main Street shrank a little more every year. Buildings went dark. Windows got boarded. Businesses became storage. Then those became nothing. The only thing that kept this town alive was habit and memory, and even those were getting expensive. I had been awake since 4. I always woke at 4. For 43 years I had woken at 4 because breakfast does not make itself, and pie crusts do not wait for grief. I lay in bed for almost an hour in the apartment above the diner, staring at the ceiling Joanne and I had painted in 1981 after a leak stained the old plaster. Same apartment, same bed, same radiator hiss, same narrow hallway, the same bedroom where Joanne died in October of 2020 with my hand in hers, and the dawn just beginning to come through the curtains. "Keep it open," she had whispered 3 days before she went. "Promise me, Frank. Don't let it die with me." I promised. I meant it when I said it. That is the hard part. I did mean it. Then the pandemic came. We went to takeout only for months that turned into more months. Our regulars were old and scared or cautious or dead, and I could not blame any of them. The cost of everything rose while the room itself sat half empty. Utilities, insurance, repairs, freezer maintenance, food costs. Packaging, loans, then more loans. The kind you take not because you think they will save you, but because surrender feels worse when it still has your name on it. By 2021, I was underwater. By 2022, I was swallowing mud. The bank letter came in September. 90 days. I spent those 90 days trying to sell a diner in a town nobody young wanted to stay in and nobody rich wanted to invest in. I met with 2 men from North Platte, 1 woman from Omaha, and a chain representative who looked around my dining room like he was pricing out bones. Nothing came of any of it. So there I was. Last day. Last coffee. Last morning with the lights under my control. I unlocked the front door at 6 and flipped on the overheads. The room came alive in pieces. First the chrome gleam of the stools at the counter, then the red booths by the front windows, then the jukebox in the corner that had not played a record since 2003, but still stood there because Joanne loved it too much for me to throw it away. She used to feed quarters into it during slow afternoons and sing under her breath while she carried plates. Patsy Cline, Loretta Lynn, Tammy Wynette. Songs about women who knew too much and endured anyway. The walls were covered in photographs, decades of them layered over one another until they felt less like decoration and more like proof. Little league teams. The Valentine High prom class of 1989 with all that tulle and bad hair. Birthday cakes, retirement breakfasts, pancake fundraisers, snow days, wedding parties, babies who became men with mustaches and daughters of their own. Every inch of that place had held somebody's ordinary life at one point or another. Above the register was the photo that mattered most. Joanne and me on opening day in 1979. We were 25. She was in her pink waitress uniform with a white apron and her hair tied back. I was in a cook's apron, skinny as a nail, full head of brown hair, face so open I almost could not bear looking at it now. We were grinning like fools, like kids who still thought effort and love might be enough to hold the world in place. Joanne died before the world could prove her wrong. I tied on my apron and started the coffee machine, the same industrial monster we bought used in 1982. It rattled, coughed, groaned, and then settled into the familiar hiss and gurgle that had opened my mornings for 40 years. Some things age the way people do. They get louder, more stubborn, and somehow dearer because of it. Outside, the prairie was turning gold under the thin December sunrise. Frost sat on the ditch grass. Highway 20 was pale and empty. Joanne used to stand at the window with a mug in her hands and say, "We may not have much, Frank, but we have this light." Back then, I would kiss the top of her head and tell her light did not pay invoices. She would shrug and answer, "No, but it reminds you life's still there." That morning, the light looked expensive, more than I could afford. I cracked eggs on the grill, laid out bacon, dropped hash browns. Muscle memory took over. My hands still knew the work, even if my heart had begun to loosen from it. Cooking had always been the only prayer that made sense to me. You take raw things and heat them and season them and turn them into comfort. It is not salvation, but it is something. At 6:15, the bell above the door rang. Deputy Jimmy Scott stepped in, night shift face, shoulders hunched against the cold cap in his hands. "Morning, Frank." "Morning, Jimmy." He sat at the counter. I poured his coffee without asking. He looked around the room for a second before meeting my eyes. "I'm real sorry about today." "Yeah," I said. "Me too." He nodded. In small towns, there is a point where sympathy stops sounding helpful. He understood that. He drank his coffee, ate his eggs, left cash on the counter, and squeezed my shoulder on the way out. The regulars came in waves after that. The Hendersons, married 62 years, sharing scrambled eggs and wheat toast in the booth by the window where they always sat, Pastor Williams with his pancakes and black coffee, the Choys from the hardware store with their children, who ordered too much whipped cream and spoke in the bright, careless voices of kids who still think the places around them will be there forever. Mr. Choi shook my hand before he left. "You were the first place we ate when we moved here," he said. "You made this town feel less strange." I thanked him, though it felt too small for what he meant. By noon, the place had thinned out. A few teenagers, 2 ranchers, a salesman from Chadron I did not recognize. I was in the back by the dish sink when I heard the bell over the door again. "Be right there," I called. I dried my hands and came out front. There were 4 people standing just inside the entrance. 3 of them were in their 30s, well-dressed, city clothes, clean coats, polished shoes, the kind of posture that comes from living in places where people expect space to open when they walk into it. The 4th was older, silver hair, dark suit, leather briefcase. Lawyer. I knew that type on sight. They did not belong in my diner, and that alone made them dangerous. "Afternoon," I said. "Sit anywhere." They took a booth by the window. I brought menus, though I could tell they did not need them. The woman was the first to speak. Auburn hair, green eyes, face composed but strained around the edges. "Just coffee for now," she said. "For all of us." I brought 4 cups and set them down. None of them touched the menus. None of them seemed interested in the room. They were looking at me the way people look at graves or miracles. "You folks passing through?" I asked. The younger dark-haired man shook his head. "No, Mr. Holloway. We came here to see you." Something inside me tightened. "Do I know you?" "No." the woman said softly. Not anymore. Then she leaned forward and asked, Do you remember the blizzard of 1992? The room changed. I do not know how else to say it. It changed. The air thinned. The windows seemed farther away. The sounds in the kitchen receded until all I could hear was that one sentence moving through 30 years of memory like a blade through canvas. December, 1992. Blizzard. Station wagon. 3 children. I pulled out a chair from the next table and sat down because suddenly my knees did not trust me. The Doyles, I said. The woman's mouth trembled. Yes. I'm Ashley Doyle. This is my brother Jeremy, and this is my brother Zach. The fair-haired man at the end of the booth gave a small, almost embarrassed nod. The dark-haired one did the same. And just like that, I saw them. Not the adults sitting in front of me, but the children underneath. The girl trying so hard not to cry. The boy who had hidden behind his mother's coat. The little one with the red nose and wet cheeks who thought Joanne was an angel. My God, I said, you were children. Ashley smiled through the tears in her eyes. You let us stay here that night. You fed us. You gave my father money to repair the car. You saved us. I stared at them. I did not know where to put my hands. The blizzard came 2 days before Christmas in 1992. Not the soft kind of snowfall that turns a place into a greeting card. This was western Nebraska at its cruelest. Whiteout winds, temperatures dropping below zero, road ice like polished glass. The kind of storm that makes a man understand how thin the line is between travel and disappearance. Joanne and I had been running the diner 13 years by then. We were 38, still trying for children we would never have. Still young enough to think disappointment was temporary if you worked hard enough. The roads got bad by late afternoon. By 6, Highway 20 was almost empty. By 7, the power was flickering and the snow was building in drifts against the windows. We had just about finished cleaning up when I heard the engine outside sputter and die. We looked out and saw an old station wagon at an angle in the lot, half covered already. The driver's door opened. Then the passenger door, then the back. A man got out carrying a little boy. A woman stumbled around the front of the car, dragging another child by the hand. A girl came behind them, leaning into the wind. Joanne did not say a word. She just turned and grabbed the door. The cold hit like metal. I shouted over the storm, "Inside! Now! Get inside!" They nearly fell through the entrance. The man's lips were blue. The woman could barely speak. All 3 children were crying or trying not to. Snow clung to their hair, eyelashes, sleeves. They looked less like a family and more like survivors washed up by weather. "Anybody hurt?" Joanne asked immediately. "No," the man stammered. "Just freezing." Car died. "Please, is there a motel?" "There's one east," I said, "but not in this. You won't make it." The woman made a sound that did not belong in a human throat. Fear does that sometimes. It strips language down to need. "They're staying here," Joanne said. The man started to protest, because decent people always do when help is larger than they expected. "You are not asking," she told him. "You have children. That storm out there is not a debate." I went to the back for blankets and the old space heaters. Joanne got soup heating and set me to work on grilled cheese sandwiches. Kids love grilled cheese. Adults do too when they are frightened enough. The family introduced themselves slowly as the heat came back into their faces. Samuel Doyle, his wife Tracy, Ashley 9, Jeremy 7, Zachary 5, called Zach. They were driving from Kansas City to Rapid City to spend Christmas with Tracy's parents. They had tried to save money by pushing through instead of stopping for the night. Then the storm came down harder than expected, and the engine started smoking. "We don't have money for repairs," Tracy said after a while, ashamed of the confession before it was even out of her mouth. We used everything on gas and Christmas presents and getting there. Joanne reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Tomorrow isn't here yet, she said. Tonight you're warm. That's enough for now. Little Zach looked at her with huge, solemn eyes. Are you an angel? Joanne laughed. No, sweetheart, just a waitress. He kept looking at her, unconvinced. We fed them until the children could barely keep their eyes open. Ashley tried to sit upright and act older than 9. Jeremy cried into his sandwich and seemed embarrassed about it. Zach fell asleep in his father's lap with a crust of grilled cheese in one mitten. By midnight, all 3 children were curled under blankets in the back booth, a tangle of limbs and winter socks. Samuel and Tracy stayed awake as long as they could, but eventually sleep took them too. Tracy's head on his shoulder, his arm around her. Every now and then the wind would hammer the windows and one of them would stir, then settle again when they remembered they were indoors. Joanne and I sat at the counter drinking coffee and listening to the storm. They were so scared, she said quietly. Yeah. She kept trying not to let the boys see her cry. Ashley? Joanne nodded. I looked over at the little girl sleeping with one hand tucked under her cheek, and felt the old, useless ache that came whenever I saw children and thought of the empty room upstairs that Joanne and I had once meant to turn into a nursery. Think the car's fixable? She asked. Probably. Might just be the radiator hose or the alternator. Hard to tell in this weather. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. They don't have money, Frank. I know. We sat with that for a while. Then she said, We do. We barely do. We have enough. That was Joanne. She never confused enough with comfort. To her, enough meant something simple. If you had more than the person in front of you, you still had room to do the right thing. I checked the car in the morning after the wind settled. The radiator hose had split, and the battery had taken a beating from the cold. Joe Harris, who owned the garage 2 streets over, opened up special when I told him there were kids involved. Small-town people can be stubborn and miserly and judgmental. They can also be astonishingly decent once a child enters the story. He helped me patch what could be patched. I paid the rest out of the till and shoved some extra cash into Samuel's hand before they left. He refused 3 times. I put it in his coat pocket on the 4th and told him pride had terrible timing. Tracy cried when Joanne wrapped pancakes in wax paper for the road. Ashley hugged Joanne around the waist. Jeremy shook my hand solemnly like a tiny businessman. Zach pressed his mitten to the back window of the station wagon as they drove off, and I waved until the taillights disappeared. Then they were gone. We talked about them for a day or 2, maybe a week. Then life closed over the memory. That is the thing about kindness. The person receiving it may build a shrine around it. The person giving it often just folds it into the workday and moves on. Back in 2022, Ashley was still watching me. How did you find me? I asked. Jeremy glanced at Zach, then at the older man in the suit, then back at me. Ashley reached into her purse and removed an envelope, old and worn soft at the edges. Inside was a check dated 1995, made out to Frank Holloway for $150. Across the envelope was stamped, Return to Sender. Our father tried to pay you back, she said. More than once. Different addresses, different years. It always came back. There was nothing to pay back. We know, Zach said. His voice surprised me. Deep, steady, gentle. But that's not how he saw it. Ashley told me their parents had died in a car accident in 2008. After the funeral, they found Samuel's journal. He had written about that storm, about the diner, about Joanne, about the money, about the shame of being rescued and the gratitude of it. He wrote that he owed us a debt he would never quite settle. The 3 children had made a promise there, in their 20s and broke and grieving, that one day they would find the couple from Nebraska and make good on their father's unfinished obligation. At first, we couldn't do much, Ashley said. We were in school, barely surviving ourselves. So we waited. I became a surgeon, she said, almost apologetically, as if the title embarrassed her. Jeremy went into commercial real estate. Zach became an attorney. And once we had the means, we started looking for you for real. The lawyer finally spoke. I'm Leonard Coy, he said, offering a slight nod. Attorney for the Doyle Family Trust. It took us 18 months to locate you and confirm the details. Confirm what details? He answered with professional delicacy. The diner, the debt, your situation, my situation, bankruptcy, foreclosure, failure. It sounded worse put that calmly. I looked at the three of them again. What do you want? Ashley smiled then, and there was something so much like Tracy in that expression that it hurt. We're not here only to thank you, Frank, she said. We're here to pay you back, all of it. What you did directly and what it set in motion after. Jeremy opened the folder he had carried in. He turned it toward me. This is the deed to Holloway's Diner, he said. My first reaction was confusion. My second was anger, then fear. As of this morning, he continued, we purchased the property from the bank, paid the full debt, $180,000. The diner is out of foreclosure. I stared at the document. The letters swam. I looked up at him, waiting for the catch. Ashley saw it and spoke quickly. We're not keeping it. We're giving it back to you, free and clear. No mortgage, no debt. It's yours, Frank. I did not understand the sentence. Zach leaned forward. We also established an operating fund. $50,000. Repairs, staff, upgrades, whatever is needed to stabilize the business. If you want to keep running it, you can. If you want to hire people and step back, that's fine too. But the diner does not close tomorrow. I had spent months preparing for loss. No one prepares for the sudden removal of it. I sat there with my hands flat on the table because they had begun to shake. Leonard slid the papers closer, though I could barely see them anymore. All we need is your signature. I laughed once. A broken, useless sound. Then I cried. I do not mean politely. I do not mean with dignity. I mean I bent forward and put a hand over my face and wept like a man whose body had finally been told it could stop bracing. 68 years old. In my own diner. In front of 3 adults who had once been frightened children under Joanne's blankets. I can't accept this, I managed. Ashley said very softly, Yes, you can. It took me a second to realize why those words landed the way they did. Because I had said the same thing to Samuel Doyle in 1992 when he tried to refuse my money for the repair bill. Your wife, Jeremy said. Joanne, she was part of this too. She was most of it, I said. We wish we could thank her, Zach said. She'd be so happy, I whispered. Ashley nodded. Our dad used to say that night changed the way he understood people. He said he had been keeping score all his life before then, worrying about what things cost, worrying about being behind, worrying about what he owed and who owed him. Then 2 strangers in a diner treated his children like they mattered without asking for anything in return. He never forgot that. They stayed 4 hours. That sounds too neat, but it is true. 4 whole hours in the middle of what was supposed to be my last day. We talked about Samuel and Tracy, about the years after that Christmas, about how Samuel got promoted and then started volunteering with a family shelter in Kansas City, because, as Ashley put it, he said no one should have to feel as stranded as we did that night. Tracy became the kind of mother who always cooked extra because she never forgot feeding 3 freezing children in a diner after a blizzard. Ashley told me about medical school and the free clinic where she now volunteered every week. Jeremy told me about choosing affordable housing projects over bigger profits because his father had raised him to believe that homes are not abstractions when you have nearly lost one. Zach told me he did pro bono work for struggling small businesses because there are too many men like me who build something with their hands and then get pushed to the edge by forces too large and too impersonal to name. All three of them were good, not merely successful. Good. That mattered more. At one point, Ashley stood and walked around the room slowly, looking at the photographs, the booths, the old jukebox, the pie case with its temperamental light bulb. She touched the edge of a booth and said, "I remember sleeping right there." "You do?" "Bits of it. The yellow blanket, the smell of coffee, your wife rubbing my hands between hers because they were so cold." I had to look away. By late afternoon, word began to leak out. Small towns are networks disguised as geography. Somebody saw the black SUV in the lawyer's car. Somebody else saw me crying through the front window. Somebody called somebody, and by 6, the diner was full again. The Hendersons came back. Pastor Williams came back. The Choys came back. Men I had not seen in years came in and asked if the rumors were true. Teenagers who had heard half a version of the story stood in the doorway with wide eyes. Somebody started clapping when I said I was staying open. Somebody else cried. Mrs. Henderson held both my hands and shook them like I had been rescued from a flood. Joe Harris, the mechanic who had fixed the Doyle's station wagon in 1992, came in carrying a metal toolbox. "Heard I've got equipment to look at," he said. "Joe, you don't have to—" Didn't ask if I had to. He looked around, grunted toward the kitchen. That Friars sounded sick for years. An hour later, Maria Lopez, who had waitressed for us in the late 90s before moving to North Platte and getting divorced and moving back, pushed through the door and said, "I heard you might need staff." By 8 o'clock, I had 3 people offering shifts, 2 men promising repair work, a woman from the bank, our local branch, not the corporate office, quietly asking if there was any way the Town Business Association could help with a reopening event, and a legal pad on the counter with names and numbers written down in every margin. The Doyle siblings stood in the middle of it all with the kind of stunned warmth people wear when they realize a private promise has rippled wider than they intended. Ashley turned to me and said, "You gave us hope that night. I don't think you knew you gave this town some too." Maybe she was being generous. Maybe towns only need a reason to remember themselves. Maybe both things are true. They stayed in Valentine for 3 days. That still amazes me. People with careers and money and cities to return to stayed 3 days in a fading Nebraska town because 30 years earlier they had once been cold there. I took them to the cemetery where Joanne was buried under a plain stone that said Joanne Marie Holloway, beloved wife, and nothing else because she hated fuss. Ashley left flowers. Jeremy stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the ground for a long time. Zach said, "Thank you," under his breath as if he was afraid to say it too loudly. They met half the town, ate every meal in the diner, sat at the counter while Joe took apart the coffee machine for fun and insulted every repair I had made on it since 1998. Ashley laughed with the Hendersons like she had known them forever. Jeremy spent an hour listening to Pastor Williams talk about stewardship and community. Zach reviewed some vendor paperwork for me and, in 10 quiet minutes, found 2 contract clauses that would have cost me more money the next year if I had signed them. On the morning they left, Ashley handed me a final envelope. "What's this?" "Open it after we're gone." They hugged me one by one. Not polite side hugs, real ones. Jeremy held on hard. Zach, who had once cried into his father's shoulder in my diner, told me, "Thank you for saving us." I answered, "Thank you for saving me." After their cars disappeared down Highway 20, I went back inside and opened the envelope. Inside was the old check from 1995 and a note in handwriting I did not recognize until I somehow did. Samuels. Dear Frank, I've tried to return this money 5 times and it keeps coming back. So maybe it is meant to stay with you until the day you need it most. Thank you for teaching my children that kindness matters. Thank you for giving us a Christmas when we had almost nothing. You saved more than our trip that night. You saved our faith in people. I hope you are well. I hope your diner is thriving. I hope Joanne is still making the best pancakes in Nebraska. And I hope you know what you did mattered. It mattered then. It matters now. It will matter forever. With gratitude, Samuel Doyle. I sat down on the stool behind my counter and cried again, quieter this time. Not from shock, from recognition. There are moments in life when meaning arrives late but intact. That note was one of them. 6 months later, Holloway's Diner was alive in a way I had not seen in years. I do not mean magically transformed. The booths still squeaked. The floor still needed refinishing. The jukebox still did not work. Joe said it never would, which sounded more like a personal challenge than a fact. But the place had a pulse again. We hired staff. We shortened some hours so I would not have to work 14-hour days. We repaired the freezer, the hood vent, and one of the back burners. Maria came back full-time. A high school kid worked weekends bussing tables and listened to music I pretended to hate. People drove from 2 and 3 counties away because they had heard the story and wanted to eat where it happened. I let them, though I hated the idea of tragedy and mercy turning into local tourism. Still, a full dining room pays bills just as well whether people come for pie or legend. Every few months, the Doyles returned. Ashley would come in wearing city boots and an exhausted surgeon's face until the first sip of diner coffee softened her. Jeremy always had a phone buzzing somewhere and ignored it as long as possible. Zach, neat as ever, still checked that I was reviewing paperwork before signing it. They were not visitors anymore. They were part of the place now. The room had made space for them. One evening that summer, after the dinner rush, I locked the front door and stood alone in the middle of the diner. The sky outside was violet with the last light. The neon open sign hummed quietly in the window. From the kitchen came the fading smell of onions and dish soap and coffee grounds. I looked up at the opening day photo of Joanne and me. "We made it, Joe," I said. I say that to her more often now. Some people would call it talking to the dead. I call it keeping the marriage in shape. I still miss her in ways that have not become elegant. I miss the sound of her keys on the counter. I miss the way she wiped her hands on her apron before pouring coffee even though her hands were never dirty. I miss the shape of her standing in the kitchen window at dawn. Grief changes form over time, but it does not leave. It becomes structural, a load-bearing wall. You stop asking it to move and learn instead how to build around it. Sometimes I think about that storm in 1992 and how close it came to being just another night. If I had locked the door 5 minutes earlier, if Joanne and I had gone upstairs already, if the Doyle's engine had failed half a mile farther east, if fear had made them stay in the car, if pride had made Samuel refuse shelter, a life can hinge on humiliatingly small timing. People like to talk about kindness as if it is soft. It isn't. Not real kindness. Real kindness is costly. It interrupts. It complicates. It risks being taken for granted. It may never be repaid. It may not even be remembered by the one who gives it. But it leaves a shape behind. In a child. In a family. In a town. Sometimes in a man standing alone in a diner he thought he was about to lose. I know now that Joanne understood that better than I ever did. On cold mornings when I unlock the front door before sunrise and the whole town still seems to be sleeping under frost, I sometimes stand for a second before turning on the lights. The room is dark. The booths are only shadows. The windows reflect nothing. And in that small moment before everything begins again, I think about all the versions of this place that could have disappeared. The one that closed. The one that became a dollar store. The one that sat empty and gathered dust. The one where Joanne's promise ended with me failing it. Then I switch on the lights. The chrome catches first, then the counter, then the red booths, then the jukebox, then the photographs. Then the day begins. Jimmy comes in, or Maria, or some rancher I've known since Reagan, or a stranger who has heard the story and wants to sit in the same booth where 3 children once slept under borrowed blankets while a storm tried to erase the road outside. I pour the coffee. I crack the eggs. I listen to the bell over the door, and every now and then, usually when the room is full and the air smells of bacon and syrup and wet coats in winter, I look at Joanne's picture over the register and think the same thing. Not the way we planned it, but close enough. Close enough to keep going. Close enough to call it grace.